Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and I'm jumping out of my skin with excitement about speaking to today's guest because she is the ultimate positive leader who has devoted her life's work to leading and supporting others to become better leaders. Her name is Nancy Murphy, and she has spent her career saying what others are afraid to and learning to say it in ways that others will listen. Ooh, so important. She's the founder and president of CSR Communications and creator of Intrapreneurs Influence Lab. Her passion is helping leaders of change within established organizations, i.e. intrapreneurs, and we're going to talk about that term a little bit more in the show. Her passion is helping those people influence and persuade others so that they can realize their vision for change faster with less frustration and resistance. Nancy's worked in philanthropy for Steve and Jean Case's Family Foundation, as a federal government program officer with the Corporation for National and Community Service, and as a global consultant for APCO Worldwide, where she designed and implemented sustainability, community engagement, and philanthropic strategies for companies such as UPS and Johnson Controls and nonprofit organizations, including W.K. Kellogg Foundation and Annie E. Casey Foundation. Nancy mentors and advises executives from local governments, federal agencies, global nonprofits, foundations, and Fortune 100 companies. She has shared her expertise from Kuala Lumpur to Kansas City and London to Las Vegas. Woohoo! Shout out for Las Vegas. She holds a master's degree in public affairs from University of Minnesota's Humphrey School, a master's in health communication from Boston University, and a bachelor's degree in American Studies from University Dayton. All right, and so we are, as you can tell from those credentials, very honored, very privileged, and very grateful to have her on the show today. Welcome, Nancy.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Alex.
Oh, it's so exciting to have you. The pleasure is all mine. And, you know, when we set up this interview, I was checking out your website, checking out your bio. And like I said at the front of the show there, I have been super excited about this because I just love what you do. And this whole topic of intrapreneurship, which is a word that's not very commonly known, but people might be experiencing it or have it in their organizations and not even realize. And so I think you're going to shed so much light on that. I'm so looking forward to it. So as we set that up, I think you know this because you mentioned earlier when we were talking that you've listened to a few episodes. I always ask our guests to start out and define how do they see positive leadership? Like, what is your personal definition of positive leadership, Nancy?
Yeah, so for me, the core of positive leadership is the idea of power with instead of power over. And I feel like positive leadership is about to emerge and have its real day in the sun, perhaps as a backlash to some of the more negative leadership we've seen. So for me, it's kind of bringing that human element back into leadership that has been, I think, so needed in this crazy year of pandemic and people struggling with, balancing family and work. And so really that vulnerability, that humanity. And for me, servant leadership has always kind of embodied my philosophy. And so I kind of bring that principle of how do we bring out the leader in everyone and help them be their best selves. And so that to me is positive leadership.
I love that definition. It's fabulous. And I agree with you. There's a lot of overlap between servant leadership and positive leadership. And it's really important that the word servant comes first, because that is in fact the whole point, right? Like, as leaders, we are there to serve others and to help them come along. And I think that ties back to your original point about, power with, not power over, right? Like, leading together, having collaboration. It's not this old school hierarchical, like, hey, I'm large and in charge and you're going to do what I say. No, no, no. Like, that is so over, right? That is just like whole generation. This is like positive leadership, servant leadership is about this collaboration and even a sense of shared leadership, I would even say as well. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I love that.
Yeah. So tell us about intrapreneurship, and how is it, first of all, what is it? And second of all, how is it different from what most people hear when they hear that word, which is entrepreneurship, right? Like, we're all familiar with entrepreneurship, but what is intrapreneurship?
So, similar mindsets around innovation and continuous improvement and kind of shaking up the status quo. But intrapreneurs are those internal change agents, those people who choose to lead within established organizations, within those large organizations. And their way of improving the world or disrupting the status quo or, promoting social change is through the established organization, versus the entrepreneur who wants to disrupt the status quo or the industry or the field by starting her or his own thing, kind of going outside those traditional organizations. And both are necessary and both serve a purpose. But I feel like in American society in particular, we've really kind of over glorified the myth of the, fabulous entrepreneur and disruptor. And while most entrepreneurs will start out, with their impact being teeny tiny, and the number of people they're reaching or the number of people they're serving is small, and sometimes it never grows. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, we've got these large organizations that we need to unlock their potential, to have scale, expertise, reach, the financial stability that already exists. And if we can just get them to be more innovative, more equitable, more effective, more efficient, then we're really seeing the impact in the world much faster, at a larger scale. But oftentimes those internal change agents aren't celebrated. They're kind of the unsung heroes. They're the ones who are like beating their heads against the wall day after day, the broken record that their colleagues hide from in the hallway, with their ideas for how the organization could work differently, how the mindset could be a little more entrepreneurial within the organization. And they often don't get the celebration or support that they deserve.
Yeah, I mean, I would even go so far as to say, like, sometimes those people are kind of viewed negatively because they want change. And we all know, especially in large organizations, change, not good, right? Like, there's a lot of resistance to it in many organizations. So it almost sounds a little bit like you're taking the entrepreneurial mindset of, hey, let's figure this out. We want to make change. We can see where the opportunity is. Let's just go do it, right? Like, there's sort of like this, well, entrepreneurship's not a straight line, but if you are an entrepreneur, you just start moving forward towards what you want to do, right? Like, you're not constrained by an organization. But in intrapreneurship, of course, you have this organization around you. And so it's almost like taking that nimbleness of an entrepreneur and trying to plant it into a large organization. Is that fair to say that?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've seen some really great examples this year of when you have leaders inside large organizations who are nimble, flexible, agile, adaptable, and they have the skills to bring people along with them. Well, when the entire status quo in the world was in upheaval, and when people couldn't sometimes pursue their missions or their businesses in the same way as they were used to, those leaders could step in. And again, the ones who have that influence ability, that they know how to identify resistance to change, see what's underneath it, overcome it, enroll those people in their vision, they're the ones who've been able to thrive in this really chaotic, uncertain environment.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. No, I mean, I think this year has really shown us that, right? And probably in your work, you've seen like, wow, the value, you always saw the value of intrapreneurs, but even more so given all the challenges that organizations have had this year, for sure. So tell us a little bit, like, why you have a really interesting niche with this, right? So why do you focus your work specifically on intrapreneurs?
Well, I would say I am an intrapreneur at heart, who's now serving intrapreneurs in an entrepreneurial context.
Right.
But I was always, one of those people who had the, kind of the optimism, a little bit of the idealism, the innovation, the creativity, the problem-solving mindset, had that entrepreneurial mindset inside an organization-loving, system-loving body, right? And so, I had to learn the hard way that just because I saw something that seemed like it could be better, and I had the idea that I immediately couldn't flip the switch, even when I was in very senior leadership roles in organizations. I learned the hard way what it can feel like to seem as if you can't fit in, and why don't other people get it?
Right.
And so, after sort of multiple experiences of being that serial intrapreneur, kind of making some change and then getting a little frustrated and leaving and getting hired somewhere else to lead change and sort of ending up at the same spot, and realizing that so many of the clients I worked with when I was in the global consulting firm were also intrapreneurs. And I watched people hit that same tipping point, like right at about 2 or 2.5 years of their change effort. And it's usually just after that things really start to open up and the change really starts to happen. And so I just thought, we're missing out on so many opportunities given the change efforts I knew these folks were leading. And I just thought, we can't afford to miss out on this. Right. We need these folks to succeed. So how can I take all the lessons I learned the hard way and help more of these intrapreneurs realize the vision for change, get their large global food service provider to successfully eliminate single-use plastics, to have more plant-forward menus that reduce carbon emissions and have people be healthier. Like, I want that change to succeed. The world needs that change to succeed. So that's why I focus on intrapreneurs.
That is so powerful. And, it's very often the case, right? Is like, you live it the hard way. And then you finally figure out, oh, okay, I see all the mistakes. I see all the things that don't work. Let me figure out how to make it work. And then as you're doing, almost like just shorten and ease the learning curve for those who are still in that spot, right? So I'm sure you said that a couple of times there, I learned it the hard way, and I hear you on that. So I'm sure you're kind of familiar with some of the, I don't know if mistakes is the right word, but maybe the obstacles that intrapreneurs run into, or maybe they create obstacles for themselves because of something they do. Like, what do you see there? I mean, what are the triggers there where it's not going to work no matter what they do? And I guess even more so, how can they avoid those?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the mistakes that intrapreneurs make, and ones I've made myself, are things like going it alone, right? Like I have to carry the whole burden of the change myself. I mean, you mentioned it at the beginning of the episode when we were talking about positive leadership and having it be collaborative. Right. And, co-creation is a huge part of successful intrapreneurship. If we fall too in love with our idea, or we feel like we have to have all the answers, and if we don't, we're weak, well, then we're going to fail. We can't carry the burden inside a large organization alone. And for people to really embrace the change, they need some opportunities to tweak it and shape it and make it their own. And so going it alone is one, and thinking that we have to have all the answers is one big mistake that entrepreneurs make. I would say another one is failing to have the campaigner mindset, is what I call it. So a lot of times we've been thinking about our idea for change, or the, you know, what the end result looks like. And we've sort of been ruminating on it and noodling on it in heads, and for a year, maybe longer, before we start talking to people about it. And by the time we do, we're like ready to move on and go 10 steps down the road, and other people are hearing it for the first time. And in a large organization, you know, like, you're going to need to be like that campaigner on the campaign trail, giving the same stump speech over and over and over, hour and after hour after hour, day after day, week after week. And with the same enthusiasm as if it's the first time you're giving it. Right. And when people ask the questions or raise the concerns, it's not like you never thought of that. And it's not like you haven't heard that question 100 times, but, you know, you need to be open as if it's the first time you're hearing it. And so sometimes we fail to do that. Like, we don't want to do the hard work of selling our idea. And we think we're not a salesperson. You know, we're an advocate, we're a champion, we're something else. Well, basically, you're a salesperson. You're a campaigner. So how do you adopt that campaign mindset? So those are just a couple of the mistakes I see. Probably the third one I'll mention is believing that all resistance is bad. And actually, you know, if you think about like weight training, or the football players that kind of run with those, you know, straps and heavy weights attached to their backs, and resistance makes us stronger. Resistance improves our ideas. And so one huge mistake I see entrepreneurs make is sort of wanting to quash or block out all resistance, or just getting super frustrated with it. And so, you know, I encourage people to adopt the mantra of get curious, not furious. And what can you learn about that resistance, and how can you use it to make the whole change effort stronger?
Yeah. Wow. You know, those are really insightful mistakes that you shared, right? And they're all sort of interconnected there too, right? Like, you come up with the idea, and it does feel like your own baby. Like, let's be honest, right? If you have a really big idea like that, it does feel like it's your own, and maybe you feel like you've got to go out there on your own with it. But to your point, and what we were discussing right at the beginning, getting other people on board, getting those co-creators, those collaborators is just so important. But related to that is, you know, because you might have lived with it so long, and by the time you share it, you're so attached to your baby. And then when there's resistance to it, you're like, no, I don't want you to change my baby. It's all good, you know? So it's almost like it's like, if you do one, you might be doing the others as well, right? Like, some of them I feel kind of go hand in hand, depending on where your mindset is at with the whole thing. And you're so right about that middle one, in terms of, like, if you've been sitting with an idea for a long time, you've processed it like 9 ways from Sunday. And for someone else, and especially in a large organization where you present a new idea, maybe a radical idea, oh boy, does it take time for it to just even sink in with people, never mind for them to truly process what it might mean and all the various consequences, good and bad, right, that might come from such a thing. Yeah. And so it's just being realistic about that. Like, not everybody's seeing it through the same lens that I am. So having some patience around that, and educating people and sticking with it through that period. It's almost like the education period of a campaign, as you made that analogy, which I think is really a great analogy, thinking of it like a campaign. Absolutely. So elaborate a little bit on the resistance, right? Because, you know, I think you're right. I mean, there's some resistance is not good because it really can become the entire obstacle to getting something done. But some of it is good in that it can make the idea stronger, right? Or maybe someone sees, a weakness in the plan that you, the originator of the idea, didn't see because they've got a different perspective, and it can shift things around, right? So how do you deal with this overall resistance, and sort of what's good and what's not good resistance? Because I do a lot of work with organizations in terms of shifting their cultures, right? If they want to shift their cultures more to a positive culture, a strengths-based culture. And nearly always there's resistance to change in that. Like, it's just a given. It's absolutely like inevitable that it's going to happen. And so it's just about sort of, how do you manage that? How do you frame the whole thing? How do you get some resistors on board? And it's just a process that you work through with that, and at least in my work. But in your work, it seems like you've got these different angles on resistance. So talk to us a little bit more about that and how you work around that as people are trying to implement change.
Yeah, well, I think similar to what you described, it is a process. And I think there will be different pockets of resistance. Sort of, if you think about like driving up a mountain, right? And you're kind of going around or doing the switchbacks, that's like you overcome it and you get to the next level, and then it's, oh, there's a new block there, and there's a new kind of resistance that comes in. So I think knowing that this is natural, that it's not you, and that when the resistance is explicit, I mean, I'm sure you see this all the time when it comes to culture change, right? Resistance that is hidden, that is covert, is really damaging and really toxic and really problematic. But when the resistance is overt, then you can do something about it, right? You can learn from it. And so we can overcome it. So I think, first of all, it's being open to resistance and what we can learn from it. And I have categorized kind of what I've seen as the 3 most common types of resistance to change. And so I can, describe those a little and give you kind of one thing that you can do if this is the type of resistance you're encountering. The first is the what-ifers. So these are like the Eeyores in our organizations. In my experience, oftentimes the attorneys in the room are the what-ifers. They're the folks
that, yes, of course, right?
Right? The doomsday planners, all the things that, well, what if we, adopt single-use plastic and everybody hates it, and all of our customers get mad, and they want coffee stirrers that are plastic, and we can't offer them anymore, and we lose all of our business. Or what if we make this change and half of our staff quits? And so they're really good at thinking up the worst case scenario. And for people like me who tend to be very optimistic and assume everything's going to work out, and I have a lot of blind spots as a leader, and I need those what-ifers to keep me from moving too fast or making certain shifts, changes that might really put the organization at risk. And so one thing you can do in that instance is to invite those folks to lead your scenario planning efforts, right? So help me think about all the things that could go wrong. How likely is that to happen? And it's probably not the worst case scenario, probably isn't very likely to happen, but okay, say it's even 50% likely. Well, what would we do if it did? And then you have a plan. And so, and that really can get the what-ifers, you're playing to their strength, right? So
that's exactly what I was thinking when you were describing it. She's like, you playing to their strength. I love it.
And then they're going to love it, right? They're going to get invested in it. So that's one way to overcome the what-ifers. The second common type of resistance to change are the status quo defenders. And, every organization has these. Oftentimes the mistake we make as intrapreneurs is when we're challenging the status quo or pointing out all the things that are wrong, or, how things can be better, the status quo defenders, their identity is often tied into, maybe they were the ones that created those policies or practices to begin with, or established that model, or they've been implementing and working that way for 20 years. And so they see the threat to the status quo as a threat to them.
Yes.
Or a criticism of them.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
we really want to be careful about the language we use, and even thinking about things like, this is great, it can be even better, or this served us really well up to this point. We know the world is changing, so we want to. And one of the ways to overcome that type of resistance is to invite these folks to do a little bit of an assessment of the current ways of doing things, and to, with some criteria that you provide, have them recommend what are the things that we want to carry forward with this change. What do we want to preserve as we create new going forward? What's serving us well that will continue to serve us well?
Yeah, I love that, because really, you're coming along with your new baby, but guess what? They had a baby maybe, 16 years ago was their idea, and then they've watched that baby become a teenager, and they are very attached to it, right? So it's like, hey, we're going to bring some of what you created into the picture. So I love that approach, Nancy. Yes.
Yeah. And that's, that's that co-creation collaboration. I mean, that's underlying all of these tools and tips for sure. Yeah. And then the last type of resistance to change are what I call the yes, no women and men, right? So these are the folks who sit in our offices or in the team meeting, and they're nodding their heads and yes, I'm on board. Yes, I'm happy to do what you're asking me to do. Got it, all good. They walk out the door and they do the complete opposite, or they just, totally ignore you and keep doing what they've been doing.
Yeah.
And the key to understanding these folks is to determine whether that yes, no kind of flip-flop is a lack of will or a lack of way. Mm-hmm. So we actually have 4 subtypes to this one, and I'll just give you one example of each. So on the, is it a lack of will? One of the subtypes is the stallers. So these are the people, I see this a lot in government, but this is true in any kind of organization where you've had people who've been there for decades. They're going to be there long after you leave. Mm-hmm. And it's really a lack of will. They have no interest in changing, and they don't believe they have to, because in their experience, people come in with great ideas, they get frustrated, they give up, they leave. And so, or they at least give up on the change. And so if I just wait you out, if I just stall and drag my feet long enough, I'll still be here. I can keep doing things the way I've been doing them. Mm-hmm. And on the, is it a lack of way? One of the subtypes there is what I call the strugglers. So these are folks who really, really want to do what you're asking them to do. They want to change, but they've probably left behind a bunch of what I call artifacts, right? All those little things in organizations that we leave behind that tell us how things really get done or what we really value. And those things might be in conflict or incongruent with the change you're leading. So they're kind of getting mixed messages, or like all the systems and policies and procedures are aligned with the old ways of doing things. So it's just really, really hard for them to implement things the new way, right? There's too much friction. And so what we need to do is identify those artifacts, figure out which ones we can get rid of or change, and lay down the new artifacts that make it easier for people to do what it is we're asking them to do. So minimize that friction.
Those are, fabulous identification of the different groups that happen. I recognized several of those for sure. And I'm sure listeners are too, if they've ever tried to change anything at all in their own organization or in someone else's. But yeah, so brilliant identification, but even more so, Nancy, so valuable that you gave actionable strategy for how to actually deal with this, right? And I think I mean, for all of these, there's sort of a common thread too. Like the whole point is that we want to get people invested in some way, right? Like even those what ifers, those Eeyores, as you mentioned, right? Like the what case scenario people, it's like, you can still get them on board, you know, like you said, play to their strengths. Look at how you can involve people in a way that works for them and also serves your purpose, right? Because it is actually important to look at worst case scenarios, right? Like, yeah, this is a show about positive leadership, but as I always say, that doesn't mean that we ignore the problems, that we ignore weaknesses, that we don't look at worst case scenarios. Absolutely not. We're just putting an emphasis on the positive, but we absolutely need to look at those, you know, those what if plus bad consequence, I call them, scenarios, right? And I think it's helpful to also counteract them a little bit with a, you know, it could be what if plus positive consequence. You know, what if goes both ways.
Yeah, I mean, one of my
forget, you know.
One of my favorite questions to the what ifers is always, well, but what if it's possible that we do this and it works? You know?
Yes. One of my dear friends, he's a fabulous professional speaker, and his whole message is what if. From the positive perspective. Like, let's just step back. Let's just say, what if it were possible? What would you do then? If it were possible, what would you do? And it really does become a whole different perspective on everything if you just turn the what if upside down, right?
Yeah.
Because we're so used to it being what if plus negative as opposed to what if plus positive, right? Yeah.
Definitely.
So tell us a little bit, I mean, you clearly have done a lot of work around this in terms of supporting entrepreneurs, helping them with their change. Like, tell us a little bit more about the actual work you do, Nancy. Like, because I'm sure there's some people listening that are thinking, geez, you know, if I could just have this woman come into my company and help me here, you know, maybe we'd actually get something done. Maybe, or they're thinking, hey, maybe I could actually get my idea to get some traction in my organization. So tell us just a little bit more specifics about what you do, Nancy.
Yeah, so I offer entrepreneurs some of the tools and tips and a community and the support that they need. And oftentimes what entrepreneurs can get approval to invest resources and bring outside help around are things like strategy development. So that's a tool that we provide. So you have this idea, how do we create, you know, the difference between the goal setter who has the idea and the goal getter who realizes that vision for change. So we can give you a strategy development process that you really own, that we support, that will help you really get those goals, not just set those goals in your team or your organization. The other thing is, you know, underlying all of the mistakes I shared, the resistance, how we overcome it, is effective communication. And a lot of times with these big change efforts, that's where leaders fall short. And so the other service area we have is called Mind the Essence. And it's all for how do we get to the core of what you need to communicate and help you design a strategy and messaging that really allows you to take the perspective of the folks you're trying to enroll in your vision for change. You know, how do you use influence and persuasion through effective communication? And the third area for nonprofits and foundations that we work with is something called Board Booster. So oftentimes we're working with the CEO, but she or he can't get their board on board with the change.
Yes.
And so, you know, or they had the board that got them to this point isn't the board that's going to carry them forward. So we provide a lot of support there. And then finally, our kind of capstone program is called the Intrapreneurs Influence Lab. And it is really like, it's not a training program. It's not a theory-based thing. It's all very practical, applicable, problem solving in the moment. How do I become a more effective influencer and persuader? How do I enroll others in my vision for change? How do I roll it out across my organization? How do I overcome those types of resistance and really make this vision real? So those are the ways that we work with individual entrepreneurs, their teams, and their organizations.
That is so powerful. I mean, each of those elements just so necessary. And I love that you cover the communication piece because, to go back to your analogy of, change can be almost like a campaign, where you've got to be staying on message and continuing to be out there and, have your quote unquote stump speech, messaging and how you deliver it, i.e. the communication, is crucial. Like you can have campaigns that are made or broken on their messaging and their strategy there. So I love that you have that whole piece. And then especially I love on the Intrapreneur Influence Lab, you mentioned how to. Yes. Yes. I mean, this is the thing, right? Like we can all know that we're supposed to do X, Y, or Z, but where the rubber meets the road is always on, but how do I do it? So I love that you're providing that true practical, how to advice and, tools, as you said, and resources so that people can actually do it, not just learn what they should be doing, but how do I go and make it happen for me too? So, so important. Love it. Love it.
Yeah. I mean, the things that, the language that I've chosen for things is really intentional, right? It's a lab. It's all about trying stuff out, experimenting. What can we learn? Having a testing plan, adapting, having a hypothesis, trying it out. So the lab is very intentional. It's all practical and applicable. And in the early kind of days of the COVID shutdown, one of the other things that we created is something called Shift, which is the Change Leadership 30-Day Survival Kit. And like the survival kit language is super applicable. Like, how do I solve the problem of the hour? Like, give me the thing, the tool, the tip that I can use right now, not something that's going to benefit me 6 years or 6 months from now, because I got to solve the problem of the hour. So everything we do is practical and applicable for sure.
I love it. I love it. So just, one final thought here, because we are talking about, people leading change and people trying to influence change. What if someone's listening to this right now and they're thinking, I really want to instigate change where I'm at. I just don't really know how, or even if I'm ready. So how does someone know if they're actually ready to lead a change initiative, Nancy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think many of us probably think we're never ready.
Amen to that, right? Yes.
But, you probably know this better than I. The best way to build confidence is by doing it scared without the confidence. Like, we can't wait for the confidence to come. But, I would say I see sort of two types of leaders. So the first are the ones who are a little overconfident, those people who are like, I can't believe I'm the only one who sees what's broken here. I've got the best idea. I'm just going to charge super forward. And, why isn't everybody just jumping on board? And for those folks, I've
been that person. I've totally been that person.
I mean,
I'll just out myself on that.
That was me when I was 22 years old. And it's like, what is
exactly.
Exactly. Right?
Yep. Young and hungry and just ready to just take it all on, right?
Take on the world. We can fix all the problems overnight. Well, for those folks, you'll know you're ready when you're able to approach the change effort with some openness, with some humility, with the willingness to allow space for co-creation, right? All of that. The other folks are the ones who are probably underconfident, right? Well, we're sort of waiting until we get the promotion that has the title that we think is worthy of the idea we have, or I'm going to wait till I get a new boss who's a little more, or a new board chair who's a little more, or wait till we have more resources, and so for those folks, I say, probably you have the great idea. It probably is the time. So can you act from a place of maybe remembering when you took a leap before, when you made that commitment, and what skills you gained, what you learned, what confidence you have now that you can bring into this new venture. So it kind of depends on maybe where the leader is. And then the other thing I would say is like the timing in the universe, in the context. Sometimes we think we're waiting for all the lights to be green before we leave the house. And, rarely is that going to happen. But looking for where is the door sort of cracked open a little bit? Where is there one green light that we can at least get that first step? And, times like 2020, when the status quo is in upheaval everywhere, when people are doing things differently that they never thought were possible, right? Well, we could never have 85% of our staff working from home. That would never be possible. Well, guess what? You figured it out. Yep. Or when we're, having conversations about racial equity and injustice in our society in ways that we never had, like, what if something is possible? And so sort of looking for those opportunities when the door is open a little bit, and how can you take that first step through?
Yeah, I love that. Right. Because if we just wait for the stars to align, we're going to be waiting forever. Right. Yeah. I mean, you just got to sort of, to just be cliche, you just got to start with what you have and where you are and move forward, right? For some of these more hesitant folks.
Yeah. Just build that momentum, start to get the energy flowing in the right direction. So
I love it. Nancy, this has been phenomenal. I knew it was going to be going in. This is why I was so excited about this. I mean, you have shared so much insight and really actionable information, which, like I said earlier, the how-to is so important to me. It's so important that I deliver that to my listeners as well. And you shared so much about, how do I actually identify these different types of resistance? How do I deal with them? Like, what are some of the mistakes I might make if I'm going to lead change, and how can I actually avoid them, right? Like shortcut that learning curve. And then if I'm thinking about change, like, how do I go about that as well? I mean, it's just been wonderful information, expertise, knowledge that you have shared with us today. So thank you so much for being on the show. It's been terrific. And I know our listeners are going to want more of you, because I would continue the conversation, but we have to be mindful that this is a podcast after all. So, how can people get in touch with you further? And I think you also have a very cool free offer that you want to share too, right?
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. So I'm very active on LinkedIn, Nancy A. Murphy. Please connect with me there. You can email me, nancy@csrcommunications.com. I'd love to hear from you. And our website, csrcommunications.com, has lots of great information about all the services and programs that Alex mentioned that we discussed earlier. And the free offer that I'd like to put out there for your listeners is something that is called the Strategy Quick Start 3-2-1 Workbook. And this is a tool that we adapted from one we created initially in early 2017. We adapted it back at the end of March, when so many folks were saying, we know our strategy needs a reboot given everything going on in the world, but who has the time, money, or patience to go through a long, involved process? We need to shift today. And so it's 3 questions that you can ask yourself, your team, your organization, 2 exercises, and then you land on the one thing that you must make time for every day, or at least once a week, that will help you become the organization you want to be on the other side of whatever the crisis or major change is. And it's a really quick thing. You can, do it in an hour, and it really helps teams and organizations move from that kind of spinny tornado energy that can happen in the midst of a crisis and get into that flywheel energy, so that you're sort of putting all that spinning into forward movement.
That sounds fabulous. I think you have a real talent, Nancy, for taking sort of these big, almost sometimes abstract issues that we have to deal with, and just really simplifying them, breaking them down into edible, concrete pieces that we can actually grasp, like taking the intangible and making it tangible and simple, which is an incredible talent. And it seems like, because you have done that with virtually everything that we have talked about in the show. And when you describe that free offer, the workbook that you have, it's exactly that. Like, you're taking them from, what do I do? There's so many options, to let's just narrow it down and make it simple. And I love that. And simple is always the best way.
Thank you.
I love it. It has been such a pleasure having Nancy on the show. Thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us. I really do appreciate it. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for this episode. And to the listeners, if you have positive leadership stories to share, or you have questions, comments, ideas on this week's topic, or you want to connect with Nancy, but you weren't fast enough to write down her email address, no worries. You can reach out to me at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com. I always love to hear from you and hear your stories and get your questions. All right, that's it for this week. It's been such a pleasure talking to Nancy about intrapreneurship. I hope you found value from it. And this is Alex Bratty signing out and thanking you for being part of the positive leadership movement and inspiring me to do what I do every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.